And right here,
I'm Clem DeRosa.
on the subject matter of this DVD, which we call the 4 T's. The 4 T's were the brainchild of my brilliant educator friend Clem, and he came up with this concept. I'd like him to explain it, generally speaking.
Yes, Ed, the concept has been in my mind for many years. People have talked about the 3 T's. I've added an additional T, which I think is essential not only to drums but to music.
And that one is what?
And that's timbre.
Okay.
But we talk about time, taste, technique, and timbre. And that is the newest one, and yet the one that is prevalent in not only in drumming, but also in all of the music that is written and played. And if we talk about time first, it's such an elusive kind of a topic. Mm-hmm. And you ask somebody, well, what's time? And they'll say, well, it's the pulse, it's the beat, keeping everything steady and all that. I came up with a thought that would be a little more realistic, something that the students could hang their head on.
Yeah.
And I talk about the time as being a corridor with the walls made of rubber. Mm-hmm. So that, for example, the slower the tempo, the wider the corridor. The faster the tempo, the narrower the corridor. Mm-hmm. But within that corridor, the walls are made of rubber so that there's the flexibility. We often hear lead trumpet players and guys say, well, look, I want to lay back on this. So that wall expands to allow for that interpretation. But it always comes back to the original tempo. That's where we are.
Yeah.
And to me, that gives the student something to hang on to in terms of explaining time.
Yeah.
So the faster the tempo, the narrower the corridor. But yet the flexibility, if the lead trumpet player wants to lay back on some quarter notes, the wall will expand, but it must come back. What happens is that if the wall begins to contract, then the tempo is changing, it's rushing, mm-hmm. and it creates problems. And if the corridor starts out narrow and begins to expand, the tempo is slowing down. So that kind of is a better explanation of what time is. It's definitive.
Absolutely. In addition to that, which I think is a great concept of the little give and take that we have in music, don't you agree that basic good time is still never called accurately metronomic time? It's just basic good time.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and that's why I personally don't endorse constantly practicing with a metronome. I think it's okay for you to kind of time your exercises, maybe time a particularly hard piece with a metronome, stay steady. But some people almost have the idea that they better have a metronomic click when they play, and I think that this is a mistake. They don't get enough independence of self. Yeah, better to play with good swinging records, I feel, out of the two concepts.
I do too. I think that the metronome is helpful in some instances, but again, it doesn't allow for that expansion, that corridor, the flexibility.
Oh yeah,
that's what I was always concerned about.
Yes, I understand.
You have some people who play with absolute metronomic time, and you say, gee, it just doesn't feel right. It's mm-hmm. not swinging, and it has a stiffness about it. Are metronomes good to use? Of course they are. But it's like everything else. You take it and say, am I making music with this?
Exactly.
Am I playing musically?
Yeah. Something I found a long time ago from playing in bands of musicians that were older and more mature, better than I was, is when you have a faster tempo, let's say from here on up, how essential it is that you beat one foot or the other in halftime.
Absolutely.
I find a lot of younger players, not just drummers, saxophone players, trumpet players, whatever, they start spazzing in 4. And the reason I say spazzing, none of them ever do it steadily. It would be so much better to go baba da beba da bop da bop and keep that foot in halftime.
Absolutely.
When I played with the Basie band, I used to love to look down the trumpet line and see four feet on, 1 foot on each of the 4 trumpets going,
Sure.
Everybody was doing this.
Sure. And you know what that does? When you count it in 2 like that,
yes.
It gives you that space.
Yes, it does.
Instead of the 4.
Yeah, I call it spazzy because it tends to make the player a little bit nervous. It starts getting
not only your foot, but your mind gets spazzy.
A little Excel starts to creep in.
And from playing for so many years, the taste. I always think of when you play drums, everything you touch is noise unless you apply it to what's happening musically.
That's very true.
It's so obvious that you're thinking all the time what's happening to the music, to the arrangement. And so you're making something that's tasty. And also now enters timbre. Now we kind of skipped over technique, but I always look at technique, as you and I have talked, is that technique is just kind of a means.
It's a means to an end. Oh, absolutely.
The technique is just how you use it to enhance what's happening musically.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more, because I've told guys, if you get your technique at a high stage and keep it there, everything is easier. That's the biggest reward. It's not so much can I play a fast lick around the drums, but let's say the tempo is here and you have to play rhythm for 7, 8, 10 minutes. If your technique is really good, you're cool.
Absolutely.
If your technique is not, you're in trouble.
Right.
You're having a bad time, you know.
So do you need technique? Of course.
Sure.
And when we go down the 4 T's, each one of them is vital to the overall result of the musical.
Don't you think that the primary thing, I'm talking now, addressing the drummers particularly, not that it shouldn't be every musician, but listening is so important to what you're playing with. If you put your head down and say, I'm going to pound the hell out of this ride cymbal, what if that isn't a good texture, so to speak, for your first chorus on a few of your tunes? It's too loud,
And listening, if it started with a T, would be in there. I mean, because listening is, again, another element.
Yeah, and you have to listen to your ensemble when you're playing. I mean, to me, you're there to serve the music.
Sure.
The music isn't there to serve you. Unfortunately, the attitude that some people have, you're there to serve the music, in a sense. What can you add that helps the music along,
And there's your taste.
Oh, that's what I mean. That's really intrinsic taste is listening to the music and trying to become a part of it,
And I think timbre perhaps is elusive because most people don't understand that, I mean,
no, I find that on drums particularly.
It's a quality of sound that's distinctive.
Yeah, I find on drums particularly, if they try to talk about timbre, I get the sort of the deer in the headlights look, so I change the wording from timbre to the type of sound you're making, which is still timbre,
Right. It's a
are your drums tuned too loosely and floppy that they don't have much timbre, or are your drums tuned so tightly, rock tight, hard, they don't have any fullness of tone?
Right.
So I try to use some of those terms because timbre sometimes gets a funny reaction.
It's elusive. Yeah.
Timbre.
Really yeah, right. It's the tree falling down.
Yeah,
the woods,
sort of. So I've tried to find other ways around it, in a sense, although we're still talking about timbre, the quality of sound. Yeah. For instance, I have the problem of some of the drummers, even in some of our better college bands, want to make do with a small bebop drum set with an 18-inch bass drum and 2 small toms and a decent snare drum. And I keep telling them it isn't propelling the band. It doesn't mean you have to have as large a drum as I have here on the right, a 24, but you should at least have a 20-inch drum, which a guy like Mel Lewis used very successfully.
Absolutely.
And I personally think for most drummers, a 22 might be better because they might be able to use it for rock and roll playing too. So if you have one drum, I think a good 22. But an 18-inch drum, which I invented, believe it or not, back in 1948, I had the first 18-inch bass drum.
With a small group.
Yeah, and I love the 18-inch bass drum, but it doesn't really project in the big band.
No.
See, that's again timbre.
Yeah, and then the larger drum adds the bottom.
Yeah, and you can play it quietly.
Absolutely.
You know,
Well, we're going to talk about that.
Oh, yeah, we're going to demonstrate some of that. Very much so. Okay, well, we'll move over then for the next segment, and maybe I'll sit at the drums and you'll sit close to me, and we'll discuss a few give and take things.
Not only that, but and then we're going to kind of isolate some of those.
Oh, yeah, we'll do that.
So that we can actually say, listen to what he did here, and then talk about it. Chart, big band, kind of in a bassy style, and with some fine soloists. And you'll listen to Ed as he sets the band up for some of the key figures. Ed, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing on Who's Blue.
I start out on the hi-hat playing kind of the typical up and down pattern. And I do that so that I save something for later on when the band gets a little louder and more intense, and I'll go to the ride cymbal. And we talked about that in the very beginning when we were explaining the 4 T's, and that is, it's important to choose what part of your instrument you're going to play on for certain sections. A common mistake made today is playing on this cymbal from top to bottom the whole tune, but it doesn't offer any change of color. So I'm going to demonstrate the up and down motion for a little bit. With these little inverted patterns that we're playing. And while we're at it, Clem, I'll demonstrate that sound you like sometimes where we play the hi-hat loosely. That's a sound that's useful, right?
Yeah, what's nice about that is that it's another level of intensity.
That's right. Raises the bar a little bit.
It raises the bar just a little bit.
Yeah. And then the third way would be, of course, in a closed position, and that means the quietest of all the 3 that we're showing you. And those 3 will give you a nice variation to play with a change of color, change of intensity, before we go to the louder ride cymbal when the band gets more intense and louder.
Yeah, and I think we ought to mention, too, Ed, what you do so well behind the soloist. And the fact is that you get up on the ride cymbal, and as the soloist creates his or her own intensity, what you're doing is you're up and under them, supporting them, on the right cymbal with a little bit of left hand feeding, right, that kind of thing. And maybe just demonstrate a little bit of that.
Sure. So let's say if we're playing on the hi-hats, we'll play fairly straight because it's just ensemble, and then we'll go over to here where the soloist is playing, and we'll start accenting, kicking it along a little more. Kind of like that.
What's great about that is that it again, it's motivating the soloist to play. But an interesting thing, because we're going to talk about don'ts, but supposing you're playing that way, and now you want to show me, I'm the conductor and the leader, you're going to show me what great technique you have in your left hand. Just play a little bit of that.
Yeah. So let's say the tenor player is playing, and you're going... That's really welcome, like a bad rash, right?
Yes, yes.
Hey, should we demonstrate a good...
Or a head cold.
Yes. Should we demonstrate a good 4-bar break and a bad 4-bar break?
Please.
Yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes when the drummer is showing how much chops he or she has, the time gets kind of vague to the other players. So I'd like to give you an example. First, I'll play a good 4 bars, meaning in good time and, in a sense, decipherable, and the people know where to come in. Then I'm going to play a bad 4 bars, which will still be in time. It'll still be in time, but it's almost like I bet you to guess on where one is after I do it, okay? This is what not to do. The first one is what to do. Here we go. That's one of my worst bad ones.
and as the leader, I'm getting a headache and trying to bring the band in.
Yeah. But I actually was in basic time. You know,
yes,
I mean, the pulse was still going here, but who the hell wants to keep track of that garbage? And how could you come in if you're the lead trumpet or lead sax?
See? Yeah, I've seen more lead trumpet players.
I just hope, please, when you're watching this DVD, don't count the second one as one of Ed's better breaks. All right.
Folk tune that we put together to show the medium tempo shuffle, which is done frequently, but Ed adds a twist to it that gives us a kind of a really basic swing. They had the on Ferris Jacques that has that light shuffle kind of thing on it. Why don't you demonstrate what you were doing on the tune?
Okay. We like to say most of the time on most shuffles that the snare drum is more effective than the cymbals are. Not to say that you can't play the shuffle on the cymbal. For instance, you could play Ferris Jacques like this. But by and large, when the horns come in and it gets a little thicker in texture, that sound isn't quite enough to really give the shuffle the quality that you need. So we really suggest playing it on the snare drum. So what I'm doing is playing straight time here. And I'm playing a shuffle on the snare drum. Most of the time that works best. Now if it got extremely quiet, which it doesn't in our arrangement, it would be okay to switch to the first example, which is playing the shuffle here and a little backbeat here. But most of the time, the thing I'm doing on the snare drum works, and then when the band gets louder, it's the same thing as in the Who's Blues. We then switch to the ride beat here, but we're still going. And you still get that, what I might like to call the thicker sound of the shuffle on the snare drum.
To include, in addition to jazz drumming and swing and Latin, Ed said to me, you know, Clem, we ought to include some contemporary music. And so here is Fancy Funk. This is a great tune to show the difference of playing a funk rock thing using the hi-hat.
Yes, that's true. As
the contemporary players would do it. So why don't you demonstrate what you did on that tape?
Sure. Well, on a tune like this funk tune, by the way, I think it's a nice piece that you wrote. It's got that, what I call attitude in it. Yeah, kind of a little nastiness in it, you know. The important thing is to get the inside beats going. That's the important part of a funk tune. So when you're playing it, that you hear. The most important part is the inside part. If you just played it where you just heard the backbeat snare drum and maybe just a straight eighth, it wouldn't really be intrinsic to what funk is about. The inside part, that is so important, and particularly, like in our band, we don't have a rhythm guitar playing it. So especially if you don't have a rhythm guitar playing it, you want to be Mr. 16th note. That's the important part. If you have a rhythm guitarist to join you, that's even better. Chicka, chicka, chaka, chicka, 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 chak. But if not, you got it. So the important thing is, even when you go to the ride cymbal, keep the 16ths going no matter which part of the drum set you're on. And don't ever lose that, what I like to call the inside rhythm. By the way, Clem, I like this piece. This is one of my favorites.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting that we've kind of not touched on timbre, but everything that we've talked about is that unique sound that you present with the equipment that reflects the timbre of what you're doing.
Oh yeah.
And it enhances what's happening in the arrangement. Really self-explanatory. If you know the Basie band, and it has played with the Basie band, you'll see the quality and the change of how he approaches this kind of music. Bassy talk, Ed.
Yo.
You played with that band.
Yes, I did.
So
Great
you
pleasure.
know the sound, and you did it so beautifully. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Okay. Well, one of the qualities about the Basie band, and I did have an absolute privilege to play quite a bit and record quite a bit with Count Basie, is that they could swing in a quiet manner, but they had a certain intensity to the swing. And it was even today, it's a hallmark of that band. Well, this piece that Clem wrote kind of captures the Basie quality. And it's a good example of what I demonstrated a little ways back about the hi-hat having different sounds. So I think this would be a good time to show the different textures of the hi-hat that I've already described. First, I'll start out playing the up and down rather quietly behind the piano solo, and then the soft ensemble. And then I get a little bit louder, and I go to the right cymbal, and then I reverse myself and come back to the closed hi-hat in back of the Harmon trumpet solo. And I want you to pay attention to that when you listen to the tune after my explanation, okay? I start the tune this way. Go to the right cymbal for a fuller ensemble. And then, when the Harmon solo comes in with the mute, right, muted trumpet, I'm back to that closed sound I demonstrated before. And then, as things open up, we go back to the up and down hi-hat. When you're playing quietly, put as much energy and attitude into your playing as you do when you play loudly, such as... Don't just sit there because it's quiet and say, well, I won't have to really concentrate. Sometimes you have to concentrate more. And that's the idea. Keep it hopping, keep it jumping. Keep the spirit of the beat.
Yeah, and what you did on the close hi-hats, on the take, and also here demonstrated, is the fact that there's a strong enough accent on 2 and 4 so it really locks it in, and yet it isn't overbearing.
Yeah,
and it isn't stiff. Mm-hmm. Which sometimes happens when they're playing that way. It stiffens up.
Yeah.
And this is still loose, but you can feel the next level of intensity.
Yeah. You know, Clem, something I should mention on this particular tune that I haven't mentioned so far, because it is a critical point, and some drummers may not be aware of it, but I am feathering the bass drum very lightly in all of the stuff I'm doing. And the important thing is, the term feathering means you're playing very quietly on the bass drum while you're doing your hand stuff, but it adds a certain ingredient. If you don't, and you just play the cymbals, it's a rather thin sound in anything from about a 6 to 7 to larger band. Important to remember, in the jazz style of playing, to feather the bass drum, which means play lightly, and you must do it with your heel down so you can control the dynamics. If you do this, you are known as gorilla foot, and nobody wants you.
Hey, that speaks to one of the T's, and that's taste.
Okay.
When Ed and I discussed the writing of our drum book called Show Drumming, we talked about playing all types of music, and we wanted to include Latin music. And this is the theme from Fifth Symphony as a rumba. And remember, we talked about playing some Latin, and in developing the structure for the entire DVD, we wanted to include a rumba.
Yeah.
And that's the theme from the Fifth Symphony.
Yeah. In the traditional Latin band, we have a thing called playing the paella, which is on the sides of the timbales. And what we do in a rumba like this is we emulate that on the closed hi-hat, and then we try to add what you might call our simulation of the conga. With the sticks, it's simply so in a way we're trying to emulate a little timbale and a little bit of conga drum, and this is of course what the drum set drummer has to do in a lot of the other forms of Latin rhythms. We try to, in a way, do a little timbal, a little conga, and try to make one drum set have a little bit of the fullness of those two players.
Shuffle, and we wanted to introduce the playing of a fast shuffle. It's very interesting the way it's played and the way Ed approaches it on the drums. The writing includes an old Italian theme called O Marie. And just listen very closely to what Ed is doing with his left hand. Ed, when we discussed the charts and the music, we talked about several different ways to play the shuffle.
Yeah.
And O Marie is another example. Why don't you just take it and show us what you did?
Sure. Well, as I showed before, when we had a slower shuffle, which was lighter, and I said you could play it on the hi-hat perhaps if you didn't have a strong ensemble going, we demonstrated that, and then we showed how to play it on the snare drum if it got a little louder. In this particular piece that Clem has arranged and orchestrated, O Marie is pretty raucous in a way, and it's got a lot of spirit. So I think the only way you can really get that shuffle with a little guts to it is playing it on the snare drum. And I'll demonstrate what I did, and then I'll tell you about this sort of sneaky beat that I used that I learned actually from Buddy Rich. Now, the secret of this secret beat is that it comes out sounding almost like, which is a little difficult to play with one hand for a very long length of time, particularly if the tune is faster. I'm playing this a little slower than I think O Marie was. Don't you think so? Yeah.
Yes.
So I didn't really give the best tempo example. I will before we finish this. But the idea is, Buddy Rich once showed me this shuffle he could play at this ridiculous speeds, and he left the first speed out, so he went da-da-da. And it fooled me completely. I thought he was going with one hand. He said, nah. And he showed me how he left the first speed out. So I'll play it now faster, and we'll play what I like to call the Buddy Rich shuffle, which is leaving the first beat out, so it becomes boom-ta-da-da, boom-ta-da-da, boom-ta-da-da. But the important thing is, you still want to keep the backbeat in it, okay? A 1, 2, 3, 4. The BR shuffle.
Yes. Which we wanted to include as part of our drum book and also the DVD. So here's Ed and the band playing Stop and Go.
This is a really very simple beat, and it's fairly low-key, the cha-cha. The important thing is to keep the quarter note bell. I sometimes like to add eighths in between once in a while. If you do, just keep the quarter notes louder and thicker in sound than the eighths, because that's the pulsation that makes the cha-cha what it is. And here again, we emulate or simulate the conga drum with the left hand. So the whole total goes 1, 2, 3, 4. I think an important part of a simple song like this is that it has sort of a traditional type of break at the end of the phrases. And they're usually what you might call typical timbali breaks. You know, stuff, yakatikatong, boom, chink, bonk, dong, gong, kitang, chakatikatong. And it's important to listen to a lot of that kind of music so that you don't want to play a rock lick, a jazz lick. You want to play a Latin lick in Latin music. And I recommend highly any Tito Puente records, any of the fine Tito Rodriguez records. There's a million people we could mention, but any of the authentic Afro-Cuban bands, and you will listen and hear and absorb some of the authentic rhythms. Not just that you can play the rhythmic parts right, but that you play the breaks within the tradition, we call it, okay? Very important. And I particularly am a fan of the late Tito Puente. I had the pleasure to record with him when he sometimes added drum set to Latin bands, and it was a great privilege and a great pleasure to play alongside of him. Great timbal and great vibist and great arranger, by the way, a total musician.
Ed, you know, it was interesting, the sound that you're getting, again, going back to timbre, that the fact that you're holding the index finger and you get, it's not gong, 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 gong on the cowbell.
Yeah, we're kind of killing the sound.
Yeah. And play it the other way.
The other way would be...
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that's the one the cows come home,
when the cows come home. Yeah, okay. Not applicable to a cha-cha.
Okay. A rock and roll tune that is at a different tempo. When Ed and I discussed putting the DVD together, he said, you know, we ought to include something that's an eighth note, what they call an eighth note rock and roll. So here's Rockin' Robin. With Rockin' Robin, Ed, you and I had talked about the different kinds of rock playing.
Yeah.
And we did the fancy funk, and now the demonstration of this, a little different rock and roll. Why don't you show us that?
Yeah, because in your fancy funk, it was typical James Brown, I like to call it, you know, the inside 16th notes that we talked about. And I suggested to you, and you did a beautiful job of writing what I like to call just a straight eighth note rock tune, really. That's all it is. I mean, it is not a sophisticated type of rhythm. You want to play really, it's high energy, right? And it's very much continuous backbeat, what you'd call typical rock and roll, where the backbeat is intrinsic and necessary. And you don't really change the beat a heck of a lot from what you initially set, whatever your pattern is. I'm using this type of pattern. And of course, all the typical fills, stuff like that. But the most important thing, I think, is to keep the energy level up on an eighth note rock pattern. So you got to dig in.
Yeah.
You can't play too polite, and you really have to give it a little attitude.
Yeah, and that's what moved this particular chart along.
Yeah, good. And you wrote a really nice piece. Thank you for doing that. It's what I like to call more high energy rock. And I hear some people that don't put enough into it. Some drummers do. I mean, some rock drummers play these pieces just great. But I hear some drummers that don't play a lot of rock and roll, sometimes just let it sit there. They don't really put a lot of energy into it. And if you did, it would sort of sound like this.
That's the don't.
Yeah, that's kind of the don't. It's in time. You couldn't say it's not, but there's nothing there really.
I know, yeah.
It's just a tick tick boom, tick tick boom boom. You know, so it's just like really, it's not any different in rock and roll than it is in jazz, and that is that you have to put a certain amount of intensity into getting it to jump, don't you?
Absolutely.
It doesn't happen by itself.
I know. Is it too beat kind of feel, what we call a Lunsford two beat kind of feel, which again that name may not be familiar to you, but it is an entirely different feel than playing the straight 4/4 swing. It still has its swing, so listen closely to a different approach in a two feel, Shadows. One of the things that we've found lacking in a great many drummers today, the fact is that they don't really know how to play with the brushes.
They don't get a chance, do they?
And they don't get a chance.
No, not really.
And as a leader of the orchestra, when I'm playing a ballad or a swinging two feel with brushes that's soft, they just don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that, Ed.
Sure. I know we've talked about that quite a few times. And we want you to understand out there, who are watching this DVD, none of this is presented as a criticism. It's just an analysis of things that people need. We understand that if you're playing a lot of hard rock music or stuff in that vein, you're not going to really pick up the brushes perhaps ever, you know. And if you do, you don't know too much what to do if you haven't been taught by a good brush player. The important thing to remember about brush playing is clarity. Make sure the beats are clear. A common mistake I hear many drummers do, I try to help them when I'm at their schools or wherever, is they tend to mush the brushes together, kind of like this. I hear that a lot. So the important thing is at least the rhythm hand should get off the drum, play it like you would play on a ride cymbal or the closed hi-hat, then add the left hand. In other words, start here. And anyone sitting in any part of the band you're playing with should know where you're at. And that's the important part of brush playing. Now, this tempo that we're playing on Shadows is around here. That's got a nice 2-beat lope to it, doesn't it? And the brushes really fit the texture of the tune.
Yeah, and I think it's wise that you mention that it has that 2-beat flavor, because that's what I wanted to inflect there.
Yes.
It has that 2-beat flavor. And so when you're playing, if you don't have the clarity, then everything that's been written and the sound of what we're looking for is just not going to happen.
That's exactly right. Yeah. You need that pulsation through, even though it's on the bottom, bump, bump, right?
Right.
I know, mysterioso.
Yeah. And here's again the use of the bass drum.
Yeah, right.
That puts the bottom on that time feel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But no gorilla foot.
No gorilla foot. That's a don't.
Okay.
That's a don't. Irish folk song, and what we're showing here is the playing of a ballad with brushes. A little different, something that you need to study and look at and listen closely to. Danny Boy. Big band ballad. Ed, in front of the band as a leader, if the drummer doesn't know how to play a ballad. What
would you say, if you could put it into words for our viewers, what would you say is the biggest complaint on the ballads that you have with the drummer?
Mostly because there's no pulse.
And lack of clarity, right?
Lack of clarity.
To use our word from before, clarity.
Yeah. And that's key, because you're playing down in that slower tempo,
Yeah.
And the bass can't do it all.
No.
So you've got to have that pulse. You were talking about squishing it.
Yes, exactly.
And another thing they do is just make circles with no pulsation.
Yeah.
Another thing that they've done that just really drives me crazy is to play a ballad with sticks and clicking on the left hand.
Oh, yeah. That's not a good sound.
Oh, boy. It's just...
it's out of context, isn't it?
Yeah, that's distasteful.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
so show us that.
Sure. As I mentioned before, not to be redundant, but clarity is the word. You just heard it from a man who stands in front of hundreds of bands through the years and has said very often he doesn't hear clarity in ballad playing by the drummer. The important thing is when, this is Danny Boy. Let me show you what I did on Danny Boy. Now, it's a very simple beat. You know what the key is that I lifted the rhythm hand on each quarter note. The mistake many drummers make that he just pointed out is this. Same tempo. Now, I grant you there's a little bit of rhythm to that, but it's not enough to carry, is it, Clem? It's not enough to carry. Band. No, especially in a bigger band. So the important thing is make sure that the quarter note pulsations are spelled out. I like to say that these silent circles look great to the chicks in the front row.
Yes, yes.
But boy, it doesn't give the musicians anything.
No.
But I'm going to do it just for the chicks in the front row.
Yeah.
Sexy, right?
Not too impressive when I'm looking at you.
But ineffective. Okay, well anyway, just remember that please. Clarity, whether it be ballads or rhythm tunes, clarity in brush playing is what we're looking for.
Played, it's marked 3/4 time, but it's played in 1. And it has to swing. It's different. Listen closely for what Ed does on Walkin' Waltz. This is an interesting piece of music.
Oh, yeah.
And difficult. It's in 3/4 time, but actually in 1. Mm-hmm. And the figures that I wrote are difficult to play, as they will observe, especially in the beginning. And I remember when we started to do this, the fact that you said, gee, you know, Clem, I better play some time in there. And it was a good suggestion because the figure is so difficult to play.
Yeah, the figure for bass and piano is tricky.
Tricky.
Yeah.
But talk about that.
Okay. Well, this is a good example of, Clem had a great idea of sort of a duet between the bass and the piano at this rather fast jazz waltz time, but it was a little hard for them to get a hold of it rhythmically the way it's written. So it helped a lot when I just played closed hi-hat in 3, but with a feeling of 1. And that is the tempo that we played. And once I did that, it was easier for the bass, easier for the piano to get a hold of the part that they play, which if you listen, you can hear how tricky it is rhythmically to get a hold of. Then when the band started with the ensemble, I opened the hi-hats and played with that 1 feeling this way. And it's interesting, after we got done with our recording, that John Thomas, our first trumpet player, on the way out, came over to me and said, hey, thanks a lot for giving me a good 1 feeling in the fast jazz waltz, because my part was kind of tricky. And once you started doing that 1 feeling like I just demonstrated now, he said it made it easier for him to play. And those are the kind of things you hope you can hear from time to time, that you're helping the ensemble or particular players with hard parts or something by setting up something that is really rather simple, but much different than not doing it, or perhaps doing something that's not quite as definitive. When the band got louder, I went to the right cymbal. Clem, you wanted that to kind of roar a little bit there, didn't you?
Absolutely, yeah.
And you wanted the bass and the drums then to play in what we call 3 to the bar. And that's the feeling we kept going, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then even from that level, it went up another notch on the solos.
Oh, yes.
Which was very exciting.
Yeah, we played louder and
it was
more so, yeah.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, we went back
right
down to where we played the 1 feeling. Right? Yeah. And finally, I played quietly.
Yeah. Right.
And timbre on the drum set is sometimes, I think, best achieved by playing a little more quietly with the mallets, and you get kind of an open melodic sound. You don't hear it too often. A few of our drummers like to do it, beside myself, but we'd like to do a little of that for you, just to show you the drum set in a different context. And I'm going to put some whipped cream on this, if I say so, and do a little East Indian chanting, which I learned from my great teacher, Ala Raka, while studying the tabla with him. And we hope that you really enjoy this in the sense of this is timbre on the drum set in a different way. And we're going to dedicate this piece to our wonderful director, Keith, and we're going to call it Keith's Blues. Tuck it in, tuck it in, tuck it dee da. Tuck it in, tuck it to take it da da. Tuck it in, tuck it to take it da da da. Tuck it to take it dee da dee da. Da. Tuck it da. Tuck it da. Tuck it da. up your ears, your eyes, and your heart to becoming a more well-rounded musical drummer. That's what we're striving for most of all with this project, about listening to what you're playing with, applying those important 4 T's. Don't forget timbre. It's really important. In plain other words, it's the sound that you make and the type of sound that you make. It's been a great joy working with my good buddy of many years, Clem DeRosa, and we hope that this whole project will really be an educational aid. Thank you very much. Clem?
Ed, there isn't much more I can add to that. You know that our friendship goes back a lot of years. It's been an honor for me to work on the project with you, both for the book and for the DVD. And I, too, hope that you do learn a lot from it. The projects, both of them, are out there to help you become a better drummer and a better musician. Thank you.